Psychological Association's task force on COVID pandemic. And our goal has been to try to get information to all mental health therapists, as well as all people who are together surviving this pandemic that's been going on for, it seems like forever. But it certainly is over a year for us here in the United States, and longer for people who are in other countries as well. We co-partner our COVID IPV task force for interpersonal violence task force. We co-partner with Dr. Eileen Serlin, who is the chair of the international whole person approaches to dealing with trauma. So we are all learning new approaches for us to use in our toolbox, because what we are experiencing is unlike anything most of us who are alive have experienced before. We are putting together a book, and we have some of our participants who are studying the flu epidemic from 1918, which tells us things that we didn't know but should have known, because it probably would have helped us in saving lives and dealing with how to really protect ourselves by wearing masks, socially distancing, and being very careful as we go about whatever parts of our life we can go about. Those of us who are therapists in practice know that we have been very busy, overly busy. I don't think anybody's ever expected to be quite as busy as we have been. So let me introduce who's on the Zoom call, and then I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Serlin, who has put together this fantastic program that we're also eager to look forward to. So as I said, I'm here in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. You can see in my background, and Dr. Giselle Gaviria is also here in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Brittany Getnese, who we met, is calling in from Pennsylvania. And we've got Marilyn Safer, who's coming from Israel, and Roxanne Gervais, who is coming from the United Kingdom. Dr. Serlin will tell you she's from the Bay Area, and we have Eric Pepper, who's from the Bay Area, and Patricia Villavicencio just jumped on from Madrid, Spain. And Hattie, you're here from London as well, from the UK, so that's great. And I understand, Paul Kimmel, you're here from Panama. So
Panama, that's correct.
You can see we are very international. We have other people who will be jumping on during the hour-long presentation. I do want to start off with just one sad note, because I read a study. I'm glad that's not the study that's sad, it's what they're telling us that's very sad. And that's a new study out of Harvard, where they're telling us that they've looked at the differences in death rates between women and men in 2 states in the United States, in Georgia and in Michigan, and especially looking at the intersection between race and gender. And they're finding that for Black women, they are 3.8 times more likely to die in Michigan, I believe it is, and 1.8 times in Georgia, which is just confirming what we know about the inequities in healthcare and in taking patients seriously. So as therapists and as mental health practitioners, we all have to do our part to make sure that we eradicate that. That's one of the things that's been so exposed, like under the rock here with this pandemic, and hopefully we will rise to that challenge. So with that, I am going to turn it over to learn what we can do, new techniques from our colleagues in India, who are going to be introduced by Dr. Serlin.
Good morning, everyone.
Our task force is called International Whole Person Approaches, our working group of the task force. So the task force that Dr. Walker talked about, we have 10 subgroups. And since I am a psychologist and a dance therapist, and have been doing a lot of work with trauma using art-based modalities, and as we'll talk about here, they can be very effective for working with trauma, with especially nonverbal, with nonverbal embodied approaches. So that's really where our group has come from, some of the members who are here with us today. And so what we're going to talk about today, I'm going to start with an introduction in the slideshow as well, is about using what I noticed. I was working with Syrian refugees in Amman, Jordan, and the tremendous there, although they were speaking Arabic as well, still the culture loss, the threat of displacement. Some of them were in Germany, family members were in Germany. What happens to your culture, and what's the importance of culture in terms of keeping us with a secure sense of identity, sense of belonging? So much of that is disrupted and may not have been written about as much as I'd like to see it. So today's focus is on cultural forms. As I said, I'm a dance therapist as well as a psychologist, very committed to the arts and bringing in the body. I am in the Bay Area, and I have with my co-presenter today, Devika. Where did you go, Devika? On the screen, there you go. Devika Mehta, who's coming in from Mumbai, where she is the director of an expressive arts therapy program. We are now all over the world. We're delighted and like to be able to say that we understand each other despite, although we speak English, despite lots of cultural and language differences. She has with her, if I can say it correctly, Anna Priya, also from the expressive arts therapy department there, who's a drama therapist. So they'll be doing part 2 of today's presentation. Let me screen share here. I'm going to start with some slides as an introduction. Can you see this?
Yes.
Good. I hope it goes to the next one. So what we're going to talk about is This Is Nothing New, movement and the arts as healing. This goes way, way back to kind of early human beings who, the origin story of creation, the rotation of the planets. A lot of dances celebrated these forms, and in so really helped early human beings feel a connection with forces outside themselves, which they could not. There was a lot of being afraid of the power of them. So dancing with them really helped join with what was going on around them. In traditional societies, there was a lot of all kinds of dances were used for just, first of all, rhythmic. We see this with drumming, barn raising, cooking, quilting with the women, shared activities, planting and harvesting, hunting and gathering, healing, that so many were just rhythmic connections and helped people feel a sense of belonging and connectedness in their village. With the modern world and the breakdown, we see here all the plagues of climate change, use of technology, isolation, uprootedness, globalization. And what we see is tremendous loneliness, isolation that is being ripped up from your traditional setting that many have been in for many generations. So this is a photo from Amman, Jordan, where I was there. These are the women downstairs playing games with the children. We used folk dances there, connect to roots, restoring the identity. We used their music, bringing meaning and purpose and re-energizing hope familiar music and dances. This is based on a movement choir. This is at Fudan University in China, where we do some very simple movements together. But as you can see, there were 400 participants at this conference. And it was a way we did it at the opening and the closing, based on an ancient and modern form of movement choir. There we are. So the point is, it's for everyone. This is not professional. This is not for performance purposes. This is really village dancing, everyone together sharing rhythm. And here in the traditional villages, here I am in Yunnan province. And I'm going to just show a little bit of this cross-cultural connection and cultural exchanges. I was with a group of trainees in a retreat center. And on the left here, this woman was working in the kitchen. And one day she asked me if I'd like to see a performance. She brought in her friends. They get together weekly or more than that, wear their local clothes, use music, and they don't go to the gym and they don't calibrate, calories, they dance together. So they taught us their dances. And we've had exchanges like that. Some resources which are available in the handouts and will be available on the slide if you'd like to read more. And I would like to, let me just get this up here, share one other thing. Just 1 minute. This is an example of what we do. So these were the women. They came to us. As you can see, these are their dances. That's just a quick clip of that. I'm going to show one more, which is, I think, interesting here. So this man here was our translator, Jerry. He speaks, I think, 4 languages. He also comes from a village way in the south, kind of near Tibet, and he's teaching us a Tibetan folk dance. Again, these are the members of our group. We're in a retreat setting. And what is remarkable to me, as you might see it, is it looks very much like Mayim, 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 which I then taught them. Step together, kick, step together, kick. And we're all sharing these dances together. So that's it. Even in his village, even speaking 4 languages, university education, he teaches, he's the leader of this little dance group that every week in his village still does these dances, these Tibetan dances that he was teaching us. So life goes on in these villages. And it's very much based, and a big part uses the arts to really keep the villages together, keep the culture together, keep people connected in groups. And this is why when we travel, we focus so much on using the forms that are meaningful to the people we work with. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Devika, who's going to take us to a very different part of the world and how she uses traditional art forms in her work. She's also a dance therapist with her work. Go ahead, Devika.
Thank you for that, Eileen. I'm just going to quickly share the presentation. And sort of looking at navigating the known unknown, because a lot of cultural forms, they get passed to us through our ancestral. We may not know the steps or the sequences, but somehow the rhythms, the music, they are sort of in our bodies if we are willing to sort of allow it to emerge. So going into the known unknown, right? Specifically, before I start, I think it's very important to understand, especially in the Indian context, is that we have to understand the origins and the practice of art forms and their therapeutic value. But we also have to be aware of the oppressive narratives that some of these have perpetuated in the past or continue to do so. And a lot of my work is with the underserved communities or the minority communities. So when I'm bringing in an art form, or when we are taking an art form in a group which has a mixed community, we have to be very mindful that one community's narrative does not overtake another community's oppressive narrative. Also mindfully using elements of art forms with known therapeutic benefits, and then integrating them within a therapy setting or a session that we are really looking at. In a country like India, we have a lot of yogic, spiritual, religious practices, which at some form do get integrated either as a therapeutic goal for a certain population, or it might even be the practice that they're most used to when they're working with their bodies, as compared to when they're looking at dance as an accessible way of therapy. So why folk forms, right? One is people dance because they must, right? The tribal forms, the origins where we actually come from, is described by Mr. Kokar in 2003 as rhythms of a million rural feet. It's of the people, it's spontaneous, it's not staged, it's an expression of life, it's transitions, natural cycles. It's more about the collective and not how am I doing this or am I getting this right or not. It's essentially a reflection of their life, but given that India is so diverse, it is also reflective of their regional ethos and what they as a community believe in. For some, it may be a prayer to nature and to gods, but sometimes it's also to give thanks. So it's in one way, it's saying, oh God, you know, maybe get bountiful harvest or maybe get good rains this year. But at the same time, it's also sort of saying thanks and showing gratitude for the amount of resources that are provided by the ancestors and by the natural resources. So the work that I do essentially, and the reason why I'm saying I, is based in indigenous, trauma-informed and intersectional, because in India, we lie at an intersection of classism, casteism, language, gender, you name it, and we're sort of at those intersections. So it's very important to understand that even like if you look at the picture on the right, you can see these different children engaging in a movement. They sort of look at each other as a different caste. So even within a circle, they might say it that, you know, you do not belong to my caste, you don't understand. And it's very evident in the lives that they live. If you look at the center picture, you can see how the younger children have been put in the center and the older ones have created a circle around them. And even within that, there is one side is the boys and left side is the girls. So it's very important to understand that even though we're looking at indigenous practices, we are looking at trauma-informed practices, intersectionality cannot be taken away from the conversation of looking at cultural loss. So how do we fit it in dance therapy, right? There's this all Indian practices and cultural practices and dances that we do, but then there's also a therapeutic side. And given that most of you are psychologists here, we work at a symbolic level in dance therapy. If we're using cultural forms, we focus more on creation and connection, like Dr. Serline already said. And we really focus on intersubjectivity. How does the person communicate or have a dialogue with the dance form? How do they have a dialogue within themselves, essentially as a group or with me as a facilitator? And when we address cultural loss, right, a lot of the work that we do is rituals based. Rituals that are co-created, rituals that are passed on, rituals which have rhythm, repetition and play. And if we look at what do these bring in, they bring in safety, they bring in regulation, and they allow them to be present in that moment. Giving in an example, when I was studying in the UK and I was working with the Indian community over there, the women of the Indian community, one of the first few things that we really looked at was just allowing ourselves to be present in that space. And when we started using songs which they were familiar with, which either belong to their language, which even probably I wasn't aware of given the diversity in India, it made them feel safe and connected. And that's when they allowed themselves to play and to self-regulate, because till then they were sort of in a very heightened space. So cultural loss can be very mindfully addressed using rituals which emerge from their own cultural contexts, where we are not saying that when a person meets a dominant culture, they don't completely lose their sense of culture, right? But they're constantly trying to see how to fit in. So what helps by bringing in movement forms or art forms, like Dr. Saleen says, which are familiar to them, is that it allows them to reorganize what it means to be them in that dominant culture without losing the resources that their culture had to offer in the first place. So just very quickly, we're going to go into an experiential, because we're sort of at the intersection of spring in the country. Spring has already set in. We're going to take a dance from the music from Sarna community. All I want you to do is create, improvise, repeat, witness, and reflect. So easy, right? You just have to do 5 steps, not difficult at all. But what we're going to do is, can all of y'all do a different version of a clap? Like you can clap or snap, or you can clap twice. Yeah, can we do a clap and snap? Does that feel easier? I can see Lenore going, okay, perfect, beautiful, Paul. So we go clap and snap, okay? Now you can choose to dip whichever part of your body. So you can choose to dip your shoulders, you can choose to dip your head. Someone like me, since I am a movement therapist and I can't be seated for a very long time, bless my heart and bless my body. But you can also just stand up if you wish and just dip with your knees. Yeah, so you clap, snap, dip with your knees, and then I'm going to weight shift on my legs. But if you're sitting, you can just find a way to weight shift on the body. Yeah, so we're going to do all, I know I'm going to say 8 counts and it might sound like a dance teacher, but just because this is very short time, we're going to clap to the count, clap, snap to 8. Then you can dip. Yeah, if you want, you can open your arms and even use your hands to dip, if that feels comfortable to you. And then we are going to weight shift for a few counts. Yeah, so I'm going to stop sharing the screen so that we can see and witness everybody. Oh my God, Hattie is up on her feet and so is Paul. This is amazing, right? So I'm going to quickly share the music so that we can get you guys dancing. The intention of this song is to welcome spring, to welcome warmth, and to welcome abundance in our lives. Yeah, so sharing the music, and there's no right or wrong. Even if you miss a couple of beats, it's completely fine. It's all about connecting to the rhythm. And if you can just close your eyes and think of that one word that made you feel something in your body while you were moving. What is that one word that comes up for you guys? when you allowed yourself to move to the beats, welcoming abundance, not of coronavirus, but of healing and health to the community. So just reading from the chat, satisfaction, bounce, a sense of lightness, joy, awake, fun, connectedness. And it's quite interesting to see that it's not that hard to get the sequences or the steps, right? It's just about how we all were moving together. So thank you for that. And with that, I open the floor to Dr. Saline and to Lenore.
Well, we have so many distinguished guests here, and Wendy from the Sacred Dance Guild, from very many different, we've got psychologists, we've got artists, we've got dancers, we've got, did I skip? We've got all, interdisciplinary community here. So that's why I would love to hear comments from the very different perspectives. What was, for Devika and me, this is dance therapy, expressive arts therapy. We know this, but how did it seem to the rest of you, this kind of way of working with trauma? And we've been doing this also during COVID, Devika, using Zoom, which adds a whole other layer of interesting complexity about using technology. Hattie, that's your expertise as well, technology and dance, and Amy. So how was this for you? How was this in terms of working with trauma? What are your thoughts, feelings?
I think one of the beauty about dance, it's just get you out of whatever you're dealing with and really just present to the simple joy of life and your body. And that was it. Like, it just allow you to have a break, about the challenges you have in your life and just enjoy the music.
Thank you. I think I saw Hattie's hand up.
Yes, I was going to say that it was good to see the context before as well, and to then dance. It made it feel that it wasn't just us dancing, but that put it in a bigger context, which makes you feel connected to something even further outside of yourself.
Great. Thanks, Hattie. Any other hands? Paul, you're muted. Yeah.
Let me unmute. Okay. What we're doing here is some of the exercises I use with our singing group. Before we start to sing, one of the things we do is a lot of movement, because the vocal cords need relaxation and you need the energy that this will give you. Also the breathing. It helps a lot with your deep breathing, and if you want to sing well, that's also very useful. So I felt like I was getting ready to do another chorus.
Paul, can I brag about you for a second? Paul
Sure.
is a psychologist I knew him from APA. You were president of Division 48 and a psychologist for social responsibility.
Yep,
so
too.
Paul is also a very talented actor and singer who's now living in Panama with his wife, whom I saw, Ramona, somewhere back there.
She's here.
Hi, Ramona.
I'm here.
Hi, Ramona. So there are a number of us psychologists who dabble in the arts and try to bring it into our practices one way or another.
Right.
No, I am not a psychologist. I'm a lay psychologist.
You're an actor.
She's an actor.
Actor or actress, whatever is politically correct these days.
She's also an acting teacher. Very good.
I remember, it's wonderful to see you. Hi, hi.
Okay.
Anyone else? Yes, please. Anupriya, did I say that correctly?
Absolutely. As a drama,
Yourself too, please. Yeah. Please introduce yourself. Yeah.
sure. I'm a drama therapist practicing here in India. I am the assistant course coordinator of the program that Devika is the course director for. I am also a representing member of the World Alliance of Drama Therapy and the Drama Therapy India collective. So in my capacity, I pretty much, like Devika mentioned, identify as a trauma-informed, intersectional, feminist drama therapist working within the context and the setup of India. Um, lot, as a drama therapist, I think we didn't always focus on anatomy and body and the power the body has in retaining information, in channeling wisdom. So as a drama therapist, when I came back to India and started working from the lens of embodiment, I noticed that it really does support not only the exploration and the externalization of the conversations, because it's arts is such a safe space, and embodiment especially can offer such a sense of liberation. Like Amy was speaking, it allows you to just get into your body. I noticed how much embodiment was needed to start, warming up to structured work of exploring roles that come up as a result of the loss or the cultural shift and cultural loss in our bodies. So I've seen movement really bring about the aesthetic distance, or if I had to simplify it, the balance in the affective and the cognitive states. And the balance between those polarities in the continuum of our bodies and those parts which feel fragmented. I've seen movement find a way of symbolically integrating that experience in a person.
Anupriya, I just a quick comment in both of you, Devik. I'm so glad you used the word about integration for fragmented, which of course trauma does fragment us, and fragments communities and families. And the other word that you've both introduced that's so important is the intersectionality. So, and the different narratives, the competing narratives of the colonial narrative and the indigenous narratives, and that somehow we have to acknowledge that displaced persons are working in a different culture, and to find them not to accept the culture of where they are, but to sort of keep their own forms and be able to keep a sense of pride, self-respect in another culture. So thanks for those comments that are really important these days. And we're not just dancing to feel happy, although that's such a big part of it. Yeah. Any other observations, comments? Go ahead.
I want to note that Harriet Adang has been able to join us from Uganda. She doesn't always get internet connection, so we're very happy to see you here, Harriet.
Great. Thanks. Anupriya. Please continue, Anupriya. Go ahead.
We can't hear you.
All right. Okay. No, I didn't mention indigenous, but I noticed in Devika's thing it was mentioned. First of all, as dance movement therapists, those who are dance movement therapists, there's so much wisdom in the body. And then when you marry it with the indigenous roots of some of these rituals, there is so much wisdom and already therapeutic advantage. But because we are all trained in Western cultures and countries, we've learned from the Western context. So it's taking us some time to bridge what is the therapeutic value in these indigenous rituals. But we've kind of known it intuitively in our bodies and been acknowledging it way before even our practice began. So I'm very glad that Devika's presentation is there up here right now, because I think it brings back focus to some of the lost art forms that are there in our country that need focus in the therapeutic realm.
Great, thank you. Eric?
I mean, thank you so much for doing the guidance, and having your smile and spirit really move me and others, I'm sure, because we are contagious. The question I would raise, because it seems so clear to me that if people have PTSD or anything, it's linked in our bodies and we freeze. And yet most psychotherapists, and 99% of psychotherapy does not use body involvement. And so the question I would ask is, what can we do to integrate some of these patterns in the normal psychotherapy, which is basically what is mainly taught in academia and everywhere else. And it's clear when you do the break, when someone is stuck, think of the metaphor, that's psychologically stuck and physically stuck. when they shift their perspective, which you do by body movement, you also free up possibly, or you interrupt and break these cognitive loops. And yet I don't see the translation. I see you have the people who do the kind of more, you know, art and movement. They are in one little box. And then there's almost no translation to the rest. And I'm really intrigued. How do you move into that? Because it's clear you do much more in the dancing than just dancing. It's a cultural social network for people who are socially isolated. It's a freeing of, it's for a moment getting rid of self-shame or whatever they all may be.
Eric,
I'm really,
may I speak to that? Well, because you are such an expert in, first of all, let me just repeat some of your things. One of the simple things we can do, I'm doing an experiment now. I have a group in China that I'm training counselors on Zoom to bring some of these practices into their group Yalom group psychotherapy approaches. So they're counselors, they're not dancers, they're not trained. And I do want to say, we're looking at we're looking at professionalism. Dance therapists have a very rigorous, intensive training in kinesiology, all kinds of things in a way. And I've tried to bridge these worlds. So, and psychologists have an intensive training in things we need clinically, how to create a safe space. You use these words, you know, safety, containment, all those connectedness, all those things that we learn about in psychology. How do we marry them with psychologists who are not trained in the body? So simple things. Eric, you know, you're from a somatic perspective. I think a lot and question this a lot because there's also a field called somatic therapy where we do work directly with the body. How is that different from expressive therapies? Just some simple things. One of the things I'd like to say about what Devika did is the use of rhythm as a connector. That's already, somatic is moving from my perspective, the physiological body is the focus. Whereas if you start looking at we work with the symbolic body, the communicative body. So I may start with a simple movement. I demonstrated that before, a movement choir at the beginning of a group, just to start a group. So instead of a big conference of anonymous people sitting in chairs, we all stand up, we reach toward each other, we reach toward our hearts, we set an intention, but it's embedded in a kind of symbolic pattern. So we combine the movement with the intention, with the symbolic meaning of the movement. That's the integration. So we're really looking at integrating. You can do very simple things, just starting a group. And some of the counselors I'm working with in China, just start when we do the warm up or the check-in at the beginning of the group. Instead of just a check-in, a verbal check-in, we'll do something movement to warm up the group. So there's so many ways you can insert really simple practices into ongoing group work, but they are symbolic and expressive and communicative.
I think one of the things that's going to happen is as we become more relevant to cultures, as we pay more attention to different cultures, we're going to have to expand our narrow, I call it narrow, cognitive approach that seems to be in favor in psychology right now, especially around trauma, because we know that different cultures feel trauma in different places. They don't all have anxiety and cognitive interference. They may have physical interference. Like I think of the Cambodian women who had idiopathic blindness when they came to the United States after the wars in Cambodia. And they were to treat their trauma, it had to be through the body and not through cognitive behavioral approaches. And so I think that that's going to be a natural push to find other ways, which is what we're doing here as well, as trying to broaden, as psychologists, broaden what we know, because we know so much more that has scientific relevance. And that's always what we'll have to tie it to for psychology. And I love, Devika, that you were able to do that in your presentation. I thought that was just so helpful to tie together why we are going to do the rhythm, or why we're going to look at moving the body and the hands. So important to be able to do that. And I think that's our responsibility, those of us who are getting more involved and have the voice in psychology, to be able to use our voice in that way.
That's so wonderful. And I would just like to add one really important piece of that too. As we say, the trauma, the Western individualistic model that we say, how do you feel in your body? In so many cultures around the world, they're collectivist. And yes, you're nodding your head. I know in India, and I found that way. There was a study, for example, of Tibetan refugees here in the United States. What was the biggest trauma for them? It was really loss of religion, of faith, of community things. It was not, there was no I am traumatized. It's we have lost, or healing the whole village, reintegrating the individual. Another study about the child soldiers for Sierra Leone. The problem was when they tried to go back and reintegrate back into the villages. There's a dance therapist who's done work with circles, with the boys being met by the soldiers and they make a circle together. So there are all these moments around the world that are collectivist that our Western individual model really doesn't address, but this can really help. Yeah.
Eric, just to sort of offer you perspective in terms of how you can still do it I've studied in the UK, and my second year was primarily working in a trauma center for those who were advanced in it. So late adulthood, 45 and above, in terms of their experience of trauma. So I had women whose parents had PTSD, and then thereby they sort of were traumatized because at that point there was no treatment for PTSD. I don't even think PTSD was actually a term that was so organized and offered as a diagnosis at that point. And a lot of them were open to starting with the body because they had tried everything and all the different types of therapies. And I would be like, I'm a student. And they'd be like, if you can work with the body, that's where we are feeling it. And we are happy to start there. And generally, I don't know how many of you all have had this experience, but when you're training, you rarely see a client terminate. You generally have to leave them while you're in internship, or they drop out. And I actually had 3 women who said, we are happy to terminate because we now have more resources to work. We understand our body better. We understand the way we move better. And sometimes I think it's not so much so about just dancing, but it's also about understanding how am I moving, right? So if I'm feeling this anxiety, am I just really like, how you freeze in dance therapy, and we call it constriction. So if I'm constricting and there's no openness, no matter what you do with my cognitive space, if I'm constricted in my body, I'm not going to be able to access those resources. And while we started doing things which opened the body, which is why I think it's great that we did this today, because because of COVID, we've sort of really narrowed our safe spaces. And I'm bringing it back to COVID because this is about how to work with the current pandemic as well, is that we have narrowed our kinespheres. We are walking like this. We are feeling like this in public spaces. And if we don't open up, we're not going to allow ourselves for resources to come in. And mental health is all about resources, right? I mean, what can I access? When can I access? So it can definitely happen in the West as well, as long as people are aware and reflective enough to know that this is where the problem is and it's not just the mind.
Should we welcome Hattie, who's just joined? Hattie, can you hear us? Are you muted? You're muted, dear. Yeah. There.
Hello, everyone. Greetings from Uganda.
Hi, Harriet. Oh, we got a nice picture today.
Yes. Yes, I'm humbled to be here with you all.
See you, Harriet.
Thank you, Patricia.
Miss
Thank
you.
you, Leonora.
Sorry to call you out, but you got a picture on the screen. I was so glad to see you. I thought we'd grab this moment and say hello.
Thank you, thank you.
I was
humbled to
thinking,
meet
I
you
was
all.
thinking of some of the work that Patricia did with you, Harriet, with the children in Uganda, as I was looking at some of the pictures that Anapriya and Davika were showing us of children. And how the connections of these very traumatized children and how they were laughing and smiling and opening up to the world, which is so exciting to see. Because these, you know, I worry so much about the children through COVID who have had such a hard time because they have not been able to experience the kinds of play and fun with other children that they need for their development.
May I add something to that, though? It's not about the children, but we're talking about fun, and words like that were on the chat. I would just like to say the opposite for a minute, which is grieving. We're facing huge, and it's not on the screen. Lisa from our group sent Finnish woman doing traditional, there's a lament songs. Many cultures have ritualized ways of grieving. And Harriet, may I tell a quick story? It's not I don't know if you know it, but we heard a presentation from an expressive therapist from Africa who was talking about in his village. He was saying, for example, there's a man sitting up on the hill crying. And people don't come up and say, feel better, or here's a happy song. They go up and join with him and start grieving with him. And we have, and the grieving, and then people start together grieving. And then the song begins to, as anything, if you go down, it will turn into an up. If you go up, it will turn into a down, like life. Start grieving, and the energy starts building until it turns into a celebratory song. So we do that a lot in dance therapy. It's expressing all the emotions, not just joy, because that trivializes some of the depth of the work we do. And this is organized rituals for grieving that are, we've missed this in the Western world. And so many of us are facing grieving now, coming out of COVID, in fact. The waves of grieving are beginning to hit many people. So
and just to add on that, recently we've been having so many things happening, big people dying around the country, but also within our very communities. And the way of grieving is also changing culturally. Like you shared, yes, people would come and cry and mourn, and everybody is like, you know, but now they're turning grieving into using music to sing as they grieve. So we're using music now to celebrate the life or whatever we've been enjoying with this person. Instead of crying so much, we're using music now to appreciate. Yes, tears come in there, but the music is also helping us in a way of grieving and just using our traditional instruments to use music to grieve with the people that we love. So that's one thing now that the communities are picking up and embracing as a way of grieving. Yeah.
Solidarity and connectedness, but we don't just try to make people feel better. That's right.
May I say something?
Sure.
Please. We have, thank you so much for the presentations. And I will like to share the idea and the traditional loss of grieving during COVID times in many cultures, even in the Western societies. We have not been able to grieve our dead loved ones, and it not even share a ritual or get together to grieve our loved ones. But since there are other communities and traditions that burials, funerals are so important in religion, and this has been terribly affected, right? So this will bring, it's bringing so much sadness and rage sometimes and a hopelessness. And I wanted to share this.
I can go back to Eric's question for just a minute. It just made me think. I was talking to the group of the Chinese supervisees, and they said, we want to alert you because this last weekend was what they call the day of their mourning, where they go to the graves of their ancestors and bring them into the household. So it's a shared sad time for everyone. And just to alert those who are running groups, counselors, please expect a lot of waves of grief in your group today. So it's really acknowledging and working with the emotions, that directly with the emotions. That is one thing that we can do, and tune people into how they're feeling the emotions in their bodies, and find a way to express and maybe work through some of the emotions.
I think I just want to mention that this was Holocaust Memorial Week as well for those of us who are Jewish, and mourning the 6 million people who were killed in the Holocaust, and the continuing battle for people who are not Jewish, who are not aware of it, younger people, in fact, who keep denying that this terrible Holocaust occurred. So, it is important to keep alive the memories of not just pandemic the COVID kinds of deaths, but many of which were certainly preventable, in my opinion, and I guess in many scientists' opinion, had we done what we should have been doing. But also for those who are tyrants and for terrorists all over the world. So it's something that we need to think about. I've been thinking about our Western culture, which has so many positives to it, and how the individualism that you talk about, Eileen, also has some positives in terms of the energy to build and to learn new things and to develop new techniques and technologies, and how can we find a way to share with one another the positive pieces of all the different cultures, and celebrate them all in a positive way.
Lenore, I just wanted to flag one word that you just said and put that into the pot here in the middle, and that's intergenerational trauma. So I found that when working in Israel, was that we introduced ourselves around the table around, I'm second generation Holocaust survivor, I'm third generation, but so that it's not just the trauma we're seeing from that period of time, but that we all carry with us from our ancestors, and so when we work with trauma, really to recognize that it's not just what showed up in the room at that point in history, but that we're carrying a lot of history and histories of traumas that we can address this way as well.
That's an excellent point, Eileen.
Thanks. Anyone not spoken? Harriet hasn't spoken. Anybody else? Roxanne
maybe just to pick on that intergenerational trauma, I think for us, I've experienced it and it's still happening in the community, especially for the children born of war. Yes. And children born out of sexual violence. So it's still something we're struggling with. And you find that some of these children, or the young people now, they become very violent, because now there is the difference between the young people and the older persons. So that's generational trauma and violence is actually there. And we know it's because of what these young people, now they're youth, what they went through as young people, and they pass on that violent practices onto the older people. For example, when it comes to issues of accessing land or property, they think they're being denied the right to have access to such support access the support system that is supposed to protect them, and yet they were not protected. So it's it's something that we've experienced and we're experiencing in the community. So intergenerational trauma is real, because I have experienced it and I have seen it happening in my community. And just to pick on what Sarlene has said, when you look at the transitional justice, and Patricia, you can pick this from experience when you came for the International Institute, you find that we practice memorialization of those that we have lost. As a country in Uganda, as a community which has been through war, we always have these memorial services to remember those that were lost during the war. And even culturally, we have what we call memorial services. So when someone died, an elder person died in the community, we always have those services, like prayers or rituals or whatever it is, to remember those elders that have passed on. And this is not because of COVID, but it's somebody who passed away. So maybe this is something I can bring to the table to all of us as experts in this space. How would we then call this memorial, I don't know, remembering people who have passed as a result of COVID-19? How do we then respect and make sure globally they are remembered? How do we call it? Do we call it transitional justice? Do we call it COVID justice? I don't know. I'm just throwing it to us to have that reflective moment, because it is something that we would think about, maybe write about it, so people get to know that we cannot just forget. We can still hold these people in our memories, in history, in a book, in a writing or something, which can be global, which can be country, community-led. So I'm just thinking, maybe these are some of the thoughts we can think about, write about, push there, and let people get thinking, so we don't forget those that we have lost, those that have even experienced or suffered it, but have cured, because it teaches us a lot. That trauma doesn't end. It stays with those that have experienced it, but it also stays with us who are close to them in one way or the other.
It's so true. But you know, it's in addition to those that we have lost through death, everybody has lost something during this pandemic. Every one of us, not just people, but we've lost a whole year of our lives. We've lost connections with people. Many people who had developed COVID have lost abilities. They have become more disabled. We know 3/4 of the people that we have looked at who had serious COVID have serious psychological effects that continue to last. So we must, you're so right, Harriet, we must memorialize this horrendous time. And one of the things that I know Eileen will also talk about is we are writing a book. Our group, Eileen and I, are co-editing it with Charles Figley, who is the leader of our group. And we have a proposal out to Oxford University Press, who we believe will publish it. So we are starting, but every one of us should be writing, and that's why we do these roundtables every week, so that we get this information out to everybody who will listen. And you know, we have, and some of our videos have been watched over 700 times. Now that we're posting more, Patricia is posting more, and Brittany, some of the others on Instagram. We had over 300 views on Instagram of the ones that Patricia has been posting. So, you know, people are listening, they're hungry for this information. So all of us should be, and hopefully will be putting it out. I think we're about ready.
I'm just wondering, Lenore, we did promise to try to end on time.
I know, so I was just going to say, I want to introduce again Roxanne Jervis, who is here with us from London, because she and another psychologist from division of the Society for Women, will be presenting next week, next Thursday at this time, on the impact of women who work. What's the impact for those women that this pandemic has had? And so we're very excited to introduce her to you today, and all of us jump back on again next week at this time.
And can I just remind everybody that these are all posted on Facebook. So you're welcome to tune in either simultaneously with the presentations, but you can find them on both those Facebook links that are posted. And anyone who wants to join these roundtables, just let us know so we can bring you into the Zoom group. And I would like to just invite Devika and Anapriya and those who are on today to please come any Thursday you like, same time, same place, and join us for these ongoing conversations, different topics each week. And we bring in guests and we welcome contributions from people we don't even have on the screen now. So just know that you're welcome to join us.
And some, I'll just give you a couple of hints, some in the future that we're looking at. In addition to Women in Work, we're also looking at virtual reality as therapy. We're going to have some examples, hopefully, that Marilyn's putting together for us. So we're excited. We've got lots to share, lots to say, and lots of wonderful faces to look at. I love these Thursdays. Thank you all for being with us, and we'll see you again, hopefully next Thursday.
Thanks for coming. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. See you next Thursday.